Dr. Cook. Paging Dr. Cook. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR. Dr. Cook, you're wanted in the OR.
Welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast with your host, Dr. Randy Cook.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Prescription for Success podcast. I'm Dr. Randy Cook, your host for the program. Before we get into today's interview, I want to remind everyone that our podcast is produced by MD Coaches, a company dedicated to developing and empowering physicians and other healthcare professionals to realize a greater potential and to achieve a greater level of satisfaction in their chosen fields. You can find MD Coaches on the web at mymdcoaches.com. We'll get to our interview in just a moment, but first I want to give you a message from Physician Financial Services. This is a business widely recognized in the physician community for disability insurance. Lawrence B. Keller, CFP, has been in the insurance and financial services industry since 1990. You know, unlike medicine, which has a standard path that physicians have to take to gain the education, training, and experience requirements necessary to obtain board certification, the insurance and financial service industry does not. So working with an agent that is familiar with the underwriting of both disability and life insurance policies for physicians can all but guarantee a smooth underwriting process in which the desired outcome is very likely. While he may not be a doctor's first phone call regarding their insurance needs, he is very often their last. You can find Larry at drpodcastnetwork.com/Larry Keller or at the link in the description of this show. Well, I'm very excited about our interview guest today. Dr. Emily Silverman is an internist at the Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital, as well as an assistant professor of medicine at the University of California, San Francisco School of Medicine. She is also the creator and host of a very popular live storytelling event called The Nocturnists, which is also published as a podcast. And what's really remarkable is that she started that rather enormous project while she was still a resident. It's a really fascinating story, so let's hear the interview. Well, I am delighted today to be talking with Dr. Emily Silverman, who is out in the San Francisco area where she practices as an internist and does a lot of other interesting stuff that we're going to talk about at some length. And let me begin by saying, Emily, thank you very much for being here and welcome to Prescription for Success.
Thank you for having me, Randy.
Well, I'm really looking forward to our conversation. And as is always the case, we like to begin at the beginning. And I'm interested to know when you first thought that you might have an interest in practicing medicine. Was it something that came on early or late, or what's the story?
It came on early. I'm an only child. I am adopted. Neither of my parents were physicians. My dad ran a hardware store. My mom was a social worker, and actually she was an adoption social worker. So she did a lot of work, you know, dealing with custody cases and helping parents and families adopt children. Mm-hmm. And my mom couldn't have children. So when they were in their early 40s, they adopted me. So I grew up the adopted only child of an adoption social worker. And I think it was around like age, 5, 6, 7, 8 or so that I started kind of walking around saying that I wanted to be a doctor. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not sure where it came from. I think part of it was I was always really, really curious about reality and just wanting to understand Like, what's the deal? What's going on? Where are we? What is this place? What am I? What is my body? And entered into this really long journey of learning what I was and what the body is, and kind of how we all work. And, that started with biology classes in school, and learning about DNA and RNA and ribosomes and proteins and all of the cell biology, and then all the physiology and the different organ systems. And it really wasn't until medical school where I kind of felt like I could calm down. And it was like, okay, I think I get it. I think I have a handle on what all is going on here. And so I think there was this anxiety of not knowing. And so in some way, my pursuit of a medical education was rooted in a desire to know.
That's really interesting, and I apologize for interrupting, but in that entire discussion, you didn't mention a single individual in the medical profession that might have had any influence on you at all. Were there any, or was this something that was strictly internal for you?
I had my pediatrician, Dr. Keller. She was a woman, and she was a very stable presence in my childhood. Like, she was this very calm, like placid woman, beautiful woman, blonde hair. She had sort of like an angelic way about her, but she was also sturdy. Like, her hands were really like strong. And I can still remember her, the way that she would touch my abdomen and touch my chest. There was just a purposefulness to her hands. And she just it felt like she was really capable. And it felt like in some ways she knew more about me than I knew about myself.
Mm-hmm.
And there was her, but there really wasn't anyone else. I guess there was, TV shows, and I think it would be a lie.
I was going to ask that if you were influenced by television at all.
Yeah.
What, if any, were the TV influences?
Look, I think I definitely am someone who was susceptible to the glamour of the way different professions were portrayed on TV.
Of course.
But what's interesting is there are a lot of different shows like that. Like, there are cop shows, there are lawyer shows, there are political shows, there's medical shows. And it was really only the medical shows that I was drawn to. So it was sort of chicken and egg. I loved Scrubs. I loved House MD. I just loved that character.
Yeah.
And in college, the first few seasons of Grey's Anatomy were a definite guilty pleasure. And I think I was young enough to watch the way that residency was portrayed on TV and view it as something that looked exciting and fun. And even though people were staying up all night, there was this camaraderie and there was this drama, and they were all friends and they would bond. And it kind of looked like something that might be fun, even if it was hard.
And it sounds like those people came across to you as being really dedicated to something higher than themselves. Am I misreading that?
Yeah. So I grew up Jewish, but never really felt that connected to Judaism. And my parents weren't particularly religious. Like, I grew up in Miami, Florida, and we ate a lot of lobster, a lot of, so even though I did have that, and I did go to a Jewish day school, so I grew up going to, services and things like that, but I didn't feel at all a connection to anything in the Torah or the Old Testament or any of the, the Holy Scripture or anything. But I think there was a sort of spirituality that I think I wouldn't have called spirituality at the time, but in retrospect, I do think that this just painful curiosity about understanding things was the germ of what would become a very robust spirituality, which is something that I'm still discovering now.
Well, I'm a little fascinated by that. As a youngster, I was influenced by medical dramas on television as well. And And in the 60s, they were all dramas, whereas the ones in this new millennium have leaned more toward the comedy. But yet, in that, you were able to discover something that struck you as a genuine purposefulness beyond the comedy. Is that correct or not?
Definitely. I think the fact that medicine is and is seen as an inherently altruistic practice is something that I take for granted. Like I have a lot of friends now living in the Bay Area who work, in tech, and they work at different startups, different companies, different products. And I see some of them go in and out of these existential crises of like, wow, I'm a designer for this app, but like, what am I really doing for the world? Or, what is my purpose and things like that. And I think since I've been in medicine for so long, I've just never really had to ask myself those questions because it's so clear that it's a profession of connection and healing and service. And so it's just the water that I swim in that I almost don't think about it that much. I will say that the altruism aspect of the profession came to me later. I think some people come to medicine because they're really social justice minded and they know that they want to, help vulnerable populations, but they're not sure how, maybe lawyer, maybe doctor or whatever. And then they just kind of settle into medicine as their, trade, or they view it as sort of a bag of tricks through which they can practically affect change for other people in their lives. And I think that's a very noble narrative. It wasn't my narrative. My narrative was definitely like the curiosity came first. And then later I became interested in people and their stories and, what it means to touch and to heal.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting. But in any case, when you started to undergraduate school at Brown, you weren't really thinking about anything other than medical school at that point, right? Or not, right?
Right. Well, I came into college thinking that I was pre-med, but what was interesting is I had no idea what it entailed to be pre-med. Like I got halfway through college and then sort of realized that I hadn't taken a couple of the key courses that I needed to take to actually meet the requirements.
Yeah,
to
well, you're
apply
right
to
on top of
medical
my
school.
next question because your undergraduate major was art and architecture,
Right.
and I'm dying to know how you got into that area if you thought you were headed to medical school.
Yeah. So there was a summer in college where I went home to Miami, which is where I grew up. And I spent a few days a week shadowing a pediatric surgeon at Miami Children's Hospital. This woman, a female surgeon. And she was such a character. Like I just learned so much from watching her, and she was by no means a perfect person. She was a flawed person, but she was a great surgeon and a good person. And I remember I sat down with her and I said to her, I'm thinking about majoring in either biology or art history. And she said, I majored in French. And I said, oh, really? And she said, yeah, once you go to medical school, like you're going to be thinking and reading and talking and studying medicine all the time. If you can, take the opportunity to broaden your horizons and think and read and study about something else while you're in college. And so
Great advice.
That's what I did. And, I picked art history because what I haven't mentioned yet is that alongside this just curiosity about reality and science, I was just always a reader and a writer and a drawer and a painter and somebody who got really excited by like a blank piece of paper. And I think if I had been a little more courageous, I probably would have majored in visual art instead of art history. Like instead of studying, old works of art, I might have even tried to express myself through art.
And what would have been courageous about that? I'm curious why you use that term.
Maybe courageous isn't the right term. I mean, you may hear me say this later, but in a way, I feel like every decision that I made, I just don't have a whole lot of regrets. I feel like I made the decisions I made at the time based on the information I had at the time. And I think, how do I put this? I went through life performing really well and having my parents cheer me on, and performing really well and getting good grades and having them cheer me on, and pretty much learning that, the way to get cheers and love and approval was through my performance. And I think this is not true of every physician, but a lot of physicians, I think, go through this world of kind of, jumping through hoops and wanting to get every accolade and so on and so forth. And so I went through my whole life being told by other people, like, you're really smart, you're really smart. And I was getting good grades, but I actually don't think I was that smart. And it wasn't really until I met my husband in college that I think I really started the process of developing like a mind of my own. I think before that, it was very much like sort of a memorization, regurgitation, performance kind of a thing. I had the intellectual horsepower. I could do the math problems. I could do the organic chemistry problems, and sort of, I had the processing speed, but I don't think I had the sort of like critical thinking apparatus or like expressive freedom that maybe I could have had if I had been nurtured in different ways academically. And so I think art history to me felt a little bit more conventional and safe, and visual art at the time didn't really feel like a great fit because I wasn't really sure what I would create, because to create something, you have to originate it. And I don't think I was at a period in my life where I was really able to originate anything. I was more in sort of a copycat. Like someone would teach me something and I would just repeat it. And that's how I approached art history. Is I would sit in the classroom and people would lecture about art, and then I would take a test and I would repeat back what I had heard. So maybe it's not courage. Maybe it's just kind of developmentally where I was at the time.
Yeah, I was going to say it sounds like a bit of a maturation process to me. None of us spring into the world from Zeus's head fully formed, and you were just kind of taking your time. But I think I interrupted you. You said you got near the end of undergrad and realized you had some science to catch up on. Was that a challenge at all?
I had to stay on campus for a summer and take physics to get everything done on time. So it wasn't a huge deal, but it was definitely something that I realized after the fact, whereas there were a lot of pre-meds who showed up on day one of college and they knew exactly what they needed to do and in what order they needed to do it. And I wasn't one of those pre-meds. But in the end, I was able to finish everything and got everything done and landed at Johns Hopkins.
And so the whole medical school application process was kind of uneventful, or did you have some choices to make? How'd that go?
It was relatively uneventful. Applied to a lot of schools, got into a lot of them, didn't get into a fair bit of them. And of the ones I got into, I chose Johns Hopkins. I'm not sure why. I just went there and I had this feeling that this was where I was going to be. And I'm sure the fact that, it's one of the highly ranked schools helped, because I was still, in a headspace of wanting to get myself to the quote unquote best place that I could get myself. But yeah, it's funny if I go back and read my medical school application essay, which I did recently because I was preparing for a talk, the entire essay is about how I plan to forge a medical career that unified my interests in science and art, which is kind of hilarious because I don't know. I feel like as I was writing that essay, I had no idea how I was going to do that, and wasn't even sure that it was true or realistic or possible, but it felt kind of prophetic.
Yeah, sounds like, we're going to talk about where you landed in just a little while, but I want to continue with this theme of what's going through your head at this point. Here is something that you had aspired to since you were a child, and now you're in medical school. Did it turn out to be much like what you expected? Was it better than, worse than? What was your reaction?
All told, I loved medical school.
Even the basic sciences part?
You know, I wouldn't like today, I wouldn't choose a career in basic science. But again, I feel like I really needed to understand the introns and the exons and, the light chains and the heavy chains. Like I just needed to learn that. So yes, I think I did understand. I did love the basic science. I loved it.
Pretty rare response to that question. Most folks say, oh, geez, I didn't think I was going to make it. And then finally I got to the wards.
Oh,
So
no,
you're very unique in that regard.
Yeah, I hear that story a lot too, and I feel for that story. But again, it's not my story. In college, one of my favorite courses was biochemistry, and it's not that I've like particularly had fun studying it, but I still have a folder on my laptop with all of my biochemistry PowerPoints and from college, and I'll refer back to it because. And I know people kind of sneer at like the Krebs cycle and they're like, ugh, why do doctors have to study the Krebs cycle? It's not applicable. And I think they're right. It really isn't applicable. But I think the reason I enjoy knowing about the Krebs cycle is not because I think it makes me a better doctor, but because it satisfies this desire that I have to understand cellular metabolism. Like it's almost just a separate thing for me. But yeah, in the first couple of years of medical school, it was definitely the whole drinking water from a fire hose thing. And I definitely struggled during some parts of it. In particular, it was the infectious disease block that really got me. It was just so much memorization. And here I was like an Olympic memorizing machine. And even that course like threw me for a loop. Like I started having these like muscle twitches as I was studying. It was like my body was like internalizing the stress of that block and the burden of memorization. The rest of it, though, was fine and, long hours with my face in a book. But I had a great group of friends in medical school. Baltimore was a very digestible city, which is funny because I've always been someone who is in a big city. Like I grew up in Miami. I live in San Francisco now. I spent a lot of time in New York, even though I've never lived there. And yet, it was my 4 years in Baltimore, which is this smaller city where I felt kind of like I had the most community and it just felt more cohesive to me. It was one of the only phases in my life where I really had a consistent group of friends who I saw on a regular basis. And it wasn't just like a series of one-off dinner dates with random people forever. So in a lot of ways, medical school was a happy time for me. And then hitting the wards was exciting. It's definitely hard. And I think there are some things about the culture of medicine that made it hard. Like there's just a lot of pressure to perform, but not perform the same way you do on a test. It's more of like an interpersonal, can I get this team to like me kind of performance. But, I was always up for a challenge.
At what point did you make the decision that internal medicine was where you wanted to take it?
Yeah, I really loved anatomy lab in medical school. So there was a minute where I thought I might be a surgeon, and then I did my surgery rotation and it just wasn't a fit. It was just a lot of men who, it was just sort of like a very kind of testosterone laden boys club that I frankly just didn't really feel like I fit in. And as much as I loved the glamour of surgery and sort of the sex appeal of surgery and the blood, at the end of the day, if I really looked at myself, I was definitely more of an internal world, cognitive, theoretical person, and less of like an external world, tactile, touching person. So that was something that I realized and that I intuited as I went along my rotations. And internal medicine rotations at Johns Hopkins, like that's no joke. And I was just really impressed by the clinical reasoning and the whole world of internal medicine.
So even looking back, you sound very confident that you made the right choice. You don't regret not being a surgeon.
Yes, I think internal medicine was definitely the right choice for me. There was a moment where I was like, maybe I'll be a psychiatrist. Because I was starting to become really interested in stories and, my desire to understand the physical body was starting to be satisfied. And so then kind of moving on to the next frontier of like the mind, which, no one really understands. But at the end of the day, I wasn't ready to hang up my stethoscope. I wanted to do internal medicine.
Yeah. And I'm curious because I see you as having lived through a generational change that preceded me, and your remarks about the atmosphere in the surgical world. I know it hasn't been that long. Do you think it has evolved at all, or is it much the same as when you were in medical school? In terms of that, I think your words were hypertestosterone fueled atmosphere.
I don't know. I mean, there's nothing wrong with men and there's nothing wrong with testosterone. I just felt like with the surgeons, like I just didn't really feel like I fit in. Has it changed today? I don't know. I haven't been around surgeons in an OR since medical school. I will say that at UCSF where I work, I'm seeing a lot more female surgeons. So I think that's great. I'll call neurosurgery and a woman will pick up and say, this is the neurosurgery resident, or, same thing with orthopedic surgery and others. So I think it's becoming a bit more balanced, but I can't speak from personal experience since I just haven't been in it for a while.
I understand. Well, along those same lines, to sort of advance the narrative here, residency for you, I'm sure it was exhausting, as it is for all. But apart from that, were there any surprises? Was it much like what you expected? What was your overall take on that postgraduate training?
I was surprised. I love UCSF. It's a very special institution with great people and amazing doctors and clinicians, but the day-to-day of residency was not the fun team bonding, glamorous thing that Grey's Anatomy looked like on TV, which is, they should always say you shouldn't trust it if it's on TV. And I don't think I thought it was going to be like what I saw on TV, but I was surprised by like the drudgery of it, to be honest. Like just the fact that I spent half of my day sitting in front of a computer checking boxes, how much paper pushing I was doing, how much of it just felt like wrangling people to do things, corralling people, urging people to please, call this person, do this thing. So that was surprising to me. I felt like I wasn't really spending as much time with patients as I had expected. And also, I think over time, I realized that the glamorous house MD, finding the rare diagnosis was not the norm. Like a lot of medicine is, just chronic disease management, hypertension, diabetes, people coming in with, the same stuff. And sure, occasionally you see something that's kind of unusual, but yeah, I mean, I kind of went through this point where I realized, which sounds like sort of terrible and awful to say, but after having jumped through all the hoops and climbing the ladder and kind of reaching for the next rung and the next bar and everything, realizing at the end of the day, like, this isn't about me at all. This isn't about me at all. This is about the patients. And that was something that it took some maturation for me to realize that, this isn't about, it's funny, skipping ahead to the show I run, the Nocturnist Storytelling, there was this woman who was an ICU physician who came to our show and told this amazing story about a guy who came to the ICU and his labs were doing all these weird things and she didn't know what was going on. And then finally she had this idea that maybe he had this rare blood disease and she sent all these tests and she worked it up and blah, blah, blah. And finally the results came back and she realized that she was right. She got the diagnosis and her friend turned to her and said, "Great job. You got the diagnosis," and gave her a high five and blah, 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 but then she realized, oh, this diagnosis has no cure. And then she basically had to watch the patient die under her care over the next 48 hours. And it was this moment for her where she was like, this isn't a multiple choice test. Like, you're not, getting the right answer and then going home. Like, there are real real consequences for people. And even if you get the right answer and you feel like a badass for getting the right answer, like that might have nothing whatever to do with the patient's lived experience or even the patient outcome. And so I think that's definitely a realization that I came to over time, having been conditioned by my schools and my teachers and my parents that, the ultimate was to get the good grade and to get it right and to succeed, to really unlearn that conditioning. And it's something I'm still unlearning, and realize like how much of medicine is not about that at all and is about being present for patients. And, sometimes you're able to answer questions for them and give them certainty and give them a diagnosis, but a lot of times you can't, and you kind of have to hold the uncertainty with them, because there's a lot of disease processes out there that are difficult to explain, or there's a lot of diseases that maybe we do understand, but they're chronic diseases that people live with and need to be managed, or diseases where there is no cure and it's terminal. And so what does it mean to be a doctor for someone with a disease that can't be cured? Like, that interaction can still be a healing interaction. You just have to shift your understanding of the word healing. And so these are all more kind of spiritual realizations that I had in residency as I began the actual work of doctoring, which I think for a long time, doctor was something I wanted to be and not something I wanted to do. And then once I was doing it, it just felt very different.
Remember medical school? You were confident, studious, hardworking, and you learned what to expect in all manner of patient care. Then reality struck. Regulations, expenses, staff management, and administration. Is this what we signed up for? Stress on the verge of burnout, no time for family, or the reason we got into medicine. Helping people. What are the options when you're afraid you're in the wrong career? Transition, teach, quit? What if there was another way? MD Coaches can help. We're a team of medical professionals with a century of experience in the clinical and business sides of medicine. More importantly, MD Coaches has been where you are, stressed and trying to navigate a world school didn't prepare us for. MD Coaches is your mentor, your confidant, to help you make your practice shine, navigate administrations, and successfully lead staff and projects. Or if you're ready to transition, we can help there too. MD Coaches is doctors helping doctors. Visit our website to receive a free, no-obligation consultation. Go to mymdcoaches.com/RX. That's mymdcoaches.com/RX. Isn't it time someone else was on your side? Don't let the business of being a doctor stop you from doing what you love. That site again, mymdcoaches.com/RX. Visit us today.
Physician Outlook is a new magazine platform built for physicians and by physicians, and it's designed to showcase unique physician talents. Sometimes it might be clinical talents, but mostly it's about the intersection between clinical and non-clinical talents, whether it be writing or painting or cooking, or maybe even making a political statement in front of a state and local governing body, or even at the nation's capital, and dozens of other things. It's available online and in print. It's visually stunning on all of its platforms. I promise it's really unique in terms of physician lifestyle magazines. I think you'll really enjoy it. We think it's just the thing to fill your prescription for success. And like the Prescription for Success podcast, Physician Outlook magazine amplifies the voice of any doctor who has something to say, and also uniquely engages patients who still believe in physician-led, team-based care. And Prescription for Success listeners can get $20 off an annual subscription fee by visiting rxforsuccesspodcast.com/Physician Outlook. Well, I think this is probably the perfect place to begin talking about the nocturnist. And just for the benefit of our listeners, I'm going to let you explain exactly what that is. But it really is a remarkable program that I want to talk about at some length, but this is actually something that you invented while you were still in residency. And I'm just the thought of that blows me away. So if you could fill us in about the origins of the idea and how you made it happen, I'm dying to know.
Yeah, it really feels like a turning point for me because, like I said to you earlier, my whole life I kind of chugged along on the conveyor belt, like I was an excellent sheep, which is a term that, I can't remember the name of the author, but there's an author who wrote a book called Excellent Sheep, which is just about, people who don't really have a mind of their own, but just jump like puppies through the hoops to try to get, as far along as they can on the conveyor belt of success. And so I kind of was that for a long time. And I feel like that ended with the Nocturnist. The Nocturnist was really the first time that I ever originated something, that came from inside of me. It came very much from a place of just that creation from a need that I had. So what happened? So I was in my second year of residency. I was coming up for air after intern year, finally had a handle on medicine, had a handle on, where the bathrooms were at the hospital, and felt like I was hitting my stride a bit. And I don't know, I saw that there was a need, there was a gap. There were so many, how should I put this? I feel like in the 3 years of residency, I lived 10 years or 20 years. Like there's just an accelerated maturation process that happens when you're surrounded by so much suffering and illness and death. Like you're really forced to confront questions around pain and suffering and mortality that most people of our age aren't. So, but then there was no place to talk about that. And in fact, not only was there not a place to talk about it, but I feel like there's this silent culture of like, it's not okay to talk about it. Or if we show doubt or weakness or exhaustion or whatever it is, that somehow signals that we don't have what it takes and things like that. So I really wanted to bring people together just to tell stories about their lives and their experience. And what ended up happening is I went to a live show called The Moth, which I don't know if you or your listeners are familiar.
Great show. Yeah.
It's a great show. A friend brought me, and it's just people standing on stage one by one telling true stories about themselves. And it just clicked. I was like, oh, we should be doing this in medicine. And, I had 4 days off a month, and, I would get in my car on my day off and drive around San Francisco and visit all the theaters and walk in and say, hi, I'm Dr. So-and-so. I would like to rent this theater. How much would it cost? It was like, there's this.
Oh my goodness.
I had never done anything like that before. And it really feels like I just got possessed by like some kind of other consciousness. And January 2016, I rented one of the spaces, fortunately found a small room really that I think they rented it to me for like $90 and got 40 people in a room and got 8 people to speak. And there was no preparation. There was no coaching. There was no workshopping. It was more of an open mic kind of thing. And it was shaky and it was imperfect, but it was real and it was raw. And there were a lot of tears in the audience and people were really just speaking their vulnerability. And there was also like funny stories and joy.
Did it have a name at that point, and did you record
Did it have a name at that point? I think it did. I think I named it before the very first show. So yes, it did have a name, The Nocturnist.
Yeah. How'd you pick that?
How did I pick that? I made a list of names, and I went over to my friend Rob's house and I read him the list. And when I got to The Nocturnist, he said, that's the one. And I really trusted him because he's not a physician and he just has an eye for style and for aesthetics and for branding. I don't like the word branding, but it is what it is. And when I saw him react like that, I was like, okay, that's it.
Yeah, I don't think you could have picked a better one. I mean, really, this is about the thoughts that come to people when they are alone, and you're rarely more alone than you are in the middle of the night. I think it's a great idea.
Thank you.
But go ahead. I'm taking over the story here.
No, I'm glad that the name lands with you. Yeah. What was I was saying? So the very first show, yes, it had a name. People came, people spoke. And then when the event ended, people came up and said, when's the next one? And so the second show was in a theater of 80 seats. And I think to rent that theater, it was like, I don't know, somewhere between $5,000 or somewhere between $500 and $1,000, which at the time felt so expensive.
I bet.
And I sort of took a leap and I said, you know what? I'm going to rent this place and I'm just going to pay for it myself on my meager resident salary and just hope that I can recoup the costs with ticket sales. And I charged $5 a ticket and I recouped the costs and then some. We filled it up and then we, did it again. And then we did it again.
And how did you publicize it? How did you recruit an audience?
What's amazing is for the first few years of this, we were selling out shows with pretty much no advertising. It was, I would send an email to the residency. I would send an email to my friends and, the chiefs would announce it sometimes at the noon conference. And that was it. I think somewhere along the way, I built a website and people could subscribe with a newsletter, but we really weren't like printing posters or postcards or, buying ads on the radio. We had no money. That's the thing. We had, and when I say we, I say me, because it really was me for the first, definitely for the first show. And then for the second show, I was joined by Ali Block, who's our executive producer now. And then it was the two of us and we had nothing, virtually no seed funding. I mean, I didn't even know that this was going to become like a huge career defining thing. At the time, it felt more like a side passion project. So yeah, it was one of those moments of like just jumping off the cliff and building your wings on the way down. And it just was such an important thing for me to experience, I think, because having never really done anything that original up until that point, it was a tremendous growth moment for me to really be at the helm of something new and having it be mine.
And you were able to continue to work through that and give it the support that it needed in terms of your attention and your input. And still, you were a resident. And anybody who's ever been a resident knows that you don't have a lot of spare time. That's a pretty remarkable accomplishment, don't you think?
Thank you. It is an accomplishment, but what I say when people say that is that it's like, it saved me. It wasn't something that I was just doing to do it. It was like, I could not have made it through residency without doing it. I was doing it out of a need to fill something empty within myself. And so it felt at the moment like a life raft. It was like, this is what is kind of getting me through. Because if I don't build community, if I don't engage with myself and my work through the lens of storytelling and creativity and meaning making, if I don't, it's almost like the same curiosity that I had about the body where I had to learn all the biochemistry and then I could calm down. It was like the way that I had to understand sort of the philosophical and existential questions that were coming up for me in the hospital. It's like I needed to gather everyone around me and just have them explain it to me through their storytelling. Like, yeah. What is this chaos that is, the body and illness and suffering and death, but also what is this chaos of like becoming a doctor? And what is this chaos of the American healthcare system and how dysfunctional it is? And what is this chaos of physician burnout? And that was something I didn't expect. So, yeah.
So this started as a live storytelling project. And I gather at some point you made a decision that you were, in fact, going to get some good audio equipment and record all of these stories and put them on a podcast. At what point did that come along?
So the very first show I knew I wanted to record, and I went online and I bought a little hand recorder. And then at the very first show, my husband sat in the corner holding the recorder and recording the show. But what was crazy is that before the show even started, this woman walks over to me and she says, "Hi, my name is Anna and I work at NPR Snap Judgment. I heard about your show. Do you mind if I sit here and
Wow.
record it?"
Oh my
I
goodness.
mean, again, like at the time, I didn't consider myself a spiritual person, but it was just, and I had toiled in the basic science lab as a med student between the first and second year of medical school. And I had tried to sort of like be who I thought I was supposed to be, following the script of the ideal med student. And this was really the first moment where I had veered off course and done something that felt authentic. And it's just amazing how if you build it, they will come. Like I hadn't even done anything yet. And this woman from NPR showed up on my doorstep. It's just, I think, an example of how when you're really following your authenticity, the universe delivers.
Well, it certainly did for you. And this is actually expanded. I mean, the live storytelling recordings are there and they are fascinating, but you've added some things, conversations with other people, sort of like we're having right now. And I can't remember, does that have a particular name where you're talking with the authors?
Yeah. So what happened is we did these live shows, 40 people, 80 people, 150 people, 250 people, 360 people. And then in January of this year, right before the pandemic, we filled the Yerba Buena Center for the Arts with over 700 people. So these shows, and they sell out. So we started to record the shows and then people said you should release it as a podcast. So then we released it as a podcast. And the format of the podcast was we would pick a live story, air it, and then follow it up with a conversation between me and the storyteller. And that's what we did for 3 years. The series that you're referring to evolved really organically. So what happened is every year the UCSF School of Medicine honors some physician somewhere with, I think it's called the gold-headed cane. And it's meant to be a symbol of a physician who embodies the virtues of, that the med school students aspire to. And so a couple of years ago, they were going to honor physician Lucy Kalanithi with this award. And Lucy, for those of you who don't know her, is an amazing person. She's the widow of Paul Kalanithi, the neurosurgeon who wrote the book When Breath Becomes Air, on in the days and months leading up to his death of metastatic lung cancer. And after he died, she did the book tour for him, and then she became a really outspoken advocate for, end of life palliative care, things like that. And she's an amazing person and an amazing physician. And so the med students decided to honor her. And they invited me to come and sit and be in conversation with her as part of the hour-long presentation. So we did that, and the university recorded it, and it was such a great conversation that I said, like, why not just air it as a Nocturnist episode so other people around the country can listen to all the amazing things that Lucy has to say? So they were kind enough to give me the audio. I aired it as a Nocturnist episode, got really great reception, and then that was the germ of this sub-series, which is basically just me sitting down with people, usually authors, usually in healthcare, to talk about their books. And so we've done several of those, but that's been more of a side series. And certainly our core material is more just healthcare workers telling their own stories.
Remains with the storytellers, which I imagine has been a little bit of a challenge in the days of the pandemic.
Well, we certainly can't do live shows anymore, but the pandemic has stretched us creatively in ways that are actually really amazing. So what happened is the pandemic hit around February, March, and we stopped airing our regular episodes. And we said, okay, what are we going to do? Because we had been taking care of the hearts and souls of healthcare workers for 4 years by doing these storytelling shows. And, by then we had come up with a very rigorous screening process and workshopping process for the stories where we'd pick a theme, put out a call for submissions, get a bunch of submissions, pick 6 or 7 that we found really compelling. And then we would do one-on-one coaching with the storyteller in preparation for the stage. So we had this like well-oiled process. And we always joke that the story development process is half story development, half therapy. Like you really, when you're coaching someone through a story, have to figure out how to locate them and figure out like what is it that they're actually trying to say, which, by the way, is a really great skill for a physician to have, because it's something that I think
Absolutely.
is really important to do with our patients, especially people who are different than us, to really kind of lock in and see where they're coming from. But anyway, so the pandemic hit and we paused that and we decided to put out a call for audio. But this time, instead of it being like a full-on story, we just said, sign up to keep an audio diary. So what we told people is like, don't think, don't prepare, don't write, just come home from work, turn on your phone and talk into it for 5 minutes and send it to us, and do this as many times as you feel like doing. And that was some of the work of my life. I mean, between March and May, we received over 700 audio clips from over 200 healthcare workers across North America. And our tiny team of 3 was me, and then Adelaide, our head of story development, and then this wonderful medical student, Vishal Ketpal. The 3 of us listened to all these clips. And it was a lot of consciousness to hold, but it was also really healing for us, I think, as the pandemic was unfolding, to be holding that consciousness in a way. Like, just, I don't know, for me, it made me feel way less alone. But then what we would do is every Tuesday we would release an episode that was just a tapestry of voices. So we would pick, again, 5 or 6 clips and just weave them together and release it. And then the clock would reset. And then we would look at the material that had come in the week before and do it again. And then we did that every week for 10 weeks. And what we ended up producing is this really beautiful 10-episode audio documentary series where you're hearing the voices of healthcare workers as they grapple with the pandemic in real time, like really trapping in amber that feeling of what is happening. And that's really special, because I think that's something that is going to be an important historical document.
It's really stunning. The production values in there are outstanding. Makes me wish I had a staff to make me sound that good, but it's just an incredible piece of work, and I predict that in the future there are going to be a lot of people listening to those stories of what it was like to be making an effort to take care of desperately ill people in the throes of a virus that we're still trying to figure out. So you're one brilliant idea after another. How do you do that?
I don't know. So, okay. During residency, I had this unleashing of creative energy, and I think I'm still riding that wave, and I don't think it's going to last forever, which is probably a good thing because it's exhausting, but it's what's happening right now. And I think the unleashing of creative energy that is happening is coming from this kind of waking up that I had, this waking up in residency of like, okay, none of this is about me, like really having to confront my own ego and understand that medicine is about, communing with others and shepherding them through difficult experiences and really centering them. And also just understanding that I didn't have to jump through the hoops anymore. I didn't have to be a sheep anymore. I could do what I wanted. And not only that if I did what I wanted, I would be just way more effective and way more successful than if I, pretended to be someone else. And that realization, I think, just led to this, I don't know, it's almost like an uncomfortable creative energy that I feel like I'm harboring at this time. And it's like, I wake up with it. It's not a very comfortable feeling. It's actually sometimes quite unpleasant, but it's energy, and it's there, and it wants to do things, and it wants to make things. And, while it's there, I'm trying to expend it by doing things and making things.
Well, it's the best example of recognizing a need and dealing with it effectively that I think I have ever run across. And I've been around a while, so all I can say is congratulations. And I kind of have a feeling that it's not going to disappear quite as quickly as it appeared, because you really are loaded with talent, and I have great respect for what you've done. Before we let you go, I do want to ask you one other thing about something that you did a while back. Doesn't have anything to do with the Nocturnist, but I think it'll resonate with a lot of people who are dealing with what we have to deal with in medicine nowadays. And this is an article that you got published in the New York Times having to do with the electronic health record that was, as I gather, introduced at San Francisco General to replace a legacy system. And do you remember the article?
Oh, yes.
You were clearly not happy with Epic, and I would just like for you to talk about that a little bit, because as I made my exit from a profession that I loved, the thing that was weighing on me the most and the thing that I felt was weighing on everybody around me the most was this instrument, the medical record, the thing that we use to communicate with each other and to memorialize an episode of care so that it can be referred to again and again, changed dramatically during the time that I was practicing. And I think you nailed it, again, about as good as I've ever experienced. So just tell us a little bit about that article, if you will.
Yeah. Where to begin? I've talked to a lot of people who have been in practice for a long time, and I'm sure you're, one of them, who say that like medicine just became a lot less fun after the electronic health record. And I'm sure there are a lot of different reasons why medicine is less fun now than it used to be, but I think the electronic health record is one of them. And I think, I don't know, I just spend a lot of time thinking about energy and not just time, but energy. Like I get really exhausted by a 28-hour shift, and I personally don't think 28-hour shifts are leading to good work by a lot of people who just find themselves kind of drunk and exhausted by the end of that period. But, there are some trauma surgeons who come off a 28-hour shift and they feel great and they're on a high. And, so I think time is part of it, but I really think energy is more the thing. Like, what would it look like to show up to work and leave with more energy than you had when you arrived? Because I leave work and I'm so exhausted, disproportionately exhausted. Like I'll work a 10-hour day or a 12-hour day, and my husband will work a 10-hour day. We'll both get home and he's full of energy, and it's like someone attached a vacuum cleaner and sucked out all my energy. And, but then I've also had experiences where, you show up to a party and you meet someone and you just really connect with them and you sit and you talk all night. And then like when the night is over, you have more energy than you did when you went in. Like, I'm just really interested in this idea of synergy. And I think those moments where energy is produced, it comes from connection. Like it comes from people colliding with each other and connecting with each other and sort of riffing and vibing and just, laughing or not, supporting each other. And like, this is the face-to-face work of medicine, where you have a healthcare worker and a patient and they're seeing each other. And I mean that in the new agey way of like, I feel seen. Like I do mean it that way, but I also mean it in a literal way, like to physically look at each other. And what I'm seeing with the electronic health record is when you're in the room with the person, you're not even looking at them. They're not being seen. And that synergy, that coming together, that sort of alchemy of energy where you're locking eyes and you're, kind of building a rapport and joking and laughing and connecting like that, the computer is just in the way. It doesn't allow for that to happen. And what you end up with is this disconnection. And then the energy dissipates and everybody comes away from it feeling exhausted. And that's when you're in the room. And the reality is much of the day, you're not even in the room. You're sitting in a row with a bunch of other doctors, all at computers, and you're interacting with a virtual patient with the computer. Like, this is a surefire way to deplete people of energy.
I want to quote from the article, one that really stuck with me. These are your words. It's a voice that amplifies the insecurity that come with being a doctor.
Yes. Well,
That's really profound.
that's a whole other part of it. So, what I was just talking about is how the electronic health record leads to disconnection and exhaustion. But even
Exactly.
worse is when the voice of the electronic health record is telling you repeatedly that you're a failure, which, doctors come to the table with a lot of ego, like a lot of the physician identity. And I know this because I lived it. Like, a lot of physician identity is wrapped up in getting the good grade and being good and being obedient and being, it's like, am I okay? Like, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't want to rock the boat. I want to get a good grade. And so this idea of like opening up the electronic health record and being told in big, bold letters that you are deficient.
Right.
Like, it's the perfect way to make a physician feel like crap. Somebody whose sense of self-worth is entangled with the idea of success. And when they read those words, it's just our nature to internalize them.
I had really never looked at it in those terms, but the arrival of that methodology of keeping records just did away with so much person-to-person communication. And then on top of it, disembodied being, this computer is giving you an evaluation of yourself. Come on, how can anybody survive that, right?
Right. It makes no sense. I mean, what you said, the person-to-person connection, like that is the fountain from which we all draw a sense of joy and meaning and pleasure. And it's almost like just the pleasure has been sucked out. And it's sad. And I grieve it every day. I mean, I really do. You can't disregard just the statistics of physician burnout across this country. Like, I really do think it's a symptom of this problem.
I think it's very important for people to understand, particularly those who are still active in the profession. It's important to understand that it was not always this way. And this thing that has been done to you can be undone. But it will take some patience and some dedication. And the sorts of things that you're doing, promoting interphysician and interpersonal and interprofessional communication, I think is an absolute perfect way to begin that process. And I congratulate you for doing it and doing it well. Listen, I have really enjoyed this conversation, but what I want to do at this point is step aside and let you do what we always do, and that is give you an opportunity to give us your prescriptions for success. So I'm going to sit quietly for a moment, and audience, this is Dr. Emily Silverman with her prescriptions for success.
Okay. Prescriptions for success. I'll do my best. I think it's different for everyone, but if I could pick a few different things, the first thing I would say is to be in your body. So one of the things I realized recently is that all through residency, I was not in my body. I might as well have been a brain in a jar. I think it's really important to stay in touch with what your body is telling you. I think physicians a lot of the time are conditioned to kind of suppress the signals that they're receiving from their body. Like, you're tired and you just drink coffee and pretend that that isn't there. Or, wow, that was really emotionally disturbing. And it's like, I'm just going to suppress that and not deal with it. Or, wow, I'm hungry. It's like, well, I'm just going to suppress that because I have too many notes to write, or I have to use the bathroom. And like, I literally have heard residents talk about how they get urinary tract infections because they are skipping bathroom breaks. So I think that's really dangerous. And I think it's hypocritical for physicians to preach health and then not attend to their own physical being and to their own bodies. And so my first tip for success would be to be in your body and get to know your body and listen to what it has to say and figure out how to make your body feel good and strong and nourished. And if you're able to do that, you'll show up your best for your patients. And I think some of this is us having to listen to our bodies, and some of this is the culture of medicine having to change itself so that it can accommodate physicians caring for their own physical and mental health. So that's the first piece of advice. Second is to love and be loved. We talked a lot before about how people draw energy from connecting with each other, and I really feel like the more I learn about medicine and doctoring and what doctoring is, like, I just really feel like it's grounded in love for each other, for our brothers and our sisters, other human beings on this earth, whether they be similar to us or different from us, and just trying to choose love and also surround ourselves with people who love us and who can fill us up and support us so that we can show up curious and loving for our patients. And then third is sort of what I was saying earlier, which is to quiet the noise. There's a lot of noise out there, voices, scripts, expectations that you should be a certain way or do a certain thing. And I think it's totally fine to do the things that are expected. For example, if you're a physician, it's totally fine to do basic science research or clinical research. That's amazing. That's great. It just should be a deliberate choice. It should be stemming, I think, from a place of just desire and passion and authenticity. And I want people to be really careful that they're not doing those things because it's the default path, and then waking up 10 or 20 years down the line and realizing I actually don't really like what I'm doing. So just to listen to the voices around you and what they're telling you to be and what they're telling you to do, and to note them, and you can kind of interpret that however you want, but at the end of the day, really drawing from your internal compass and figuring out what kind of life you want to live, what kinds of things you want to be doing, how do you want to be spending your time, your very short and precious time on this earth. What is going to fill you up? What is going to make you feel alive? What is going to bring you energy? And then try as hard as you can to move down that path and create space for others to do the same and to live the way that they want to live. And, it sounds very idealistic, and this isn't, I don't know, sometimes the culture of medicine can make this feel like a not available option. Living authentically and making choices and really seizing control over one's life narrative. But I think the more we normalize these choices, the better and more robust and successful and healthy the physician workforce will be. So quiet the noise, dial it down, be able to sit with yourself and listen to the song that is quietly singing inside of you, and just try to follow that. That it worked for me. So those are my 3 tips: is to be in your body, love and be loved, and quiet the noise.
Well, Emily, it is no surprise to me that there is a lot of wisdom in there, and I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today and to share with us today. And before we go, I want to make sure that I give you an opportunity to tell people how to contact you, where to follow you, where to find the Nocturnist. Tell us what you'd like us to know.
So if you visit thenocturnist.com, you can see all of our work, and I recommend that you subscribe to our newsletter. And then when we have new projects coming up, you'll be the first to know. We're actually planning a project that's going to launch in January 2021. So we're going to have a really exciting project coming out, and we're going to have a call for voices. So if you feel like you have stories that you want to share, definitely subscribe to our newsletter. And when the call for voices comes out in January, we would love to have you sign up to contribute. And that's the Nocturnist. And then if you want to read more about me, you can visit my website, emilysilverman.com, and you can also find me on Twitter. And as for the book, I've been trying to write for a long time, and it's very slow going. So I might not have news on that front for a few years, but
Okay, no pressure.
Fingers crossed.
Well, I am going to just make sure that the audience understands it's the Nocturnist, plural, Nocturnist with an S.com. And it's just an amazing piece of work. So I hope people will take advantage of that, and we'll look for the book when it comes. So Dr. Emily Silverman, thank you so much for being with us today. It has been a pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much, Randy, for having me. It's been so fun to chat.
Well, I do hope you've enjoyed my interview today with Dr. Emily Silverman. But before we go, please remember to reach out to Larry Keller of Physician Financial Services for your disability insurance needs. He's been around for a while in many physician communities, helping them with the coverage they need. You can find Larry at drpodcastnetwork.com/Larry Keller. And that's a wrap on another episode of Prescription for Success. Before we go, I want to encourage you to become a subscriber to our podcast. Also, look for even more information about our guests in the show notes at rxforsuccesspodcast.com. We look forward to your comments. We hope we earned a 5-star rating today. And finally, please consider becoming a patron. Just visit patreon.com/RX for Success podcast. Thank you so very much for listening today, and don't forget to fill your prescription for success with my next episode.